The Herta is an extremely powerful erudition unit, and in this video I will be showing you how to build her and the teams to properly maximize her damage. I've already gone over her kit in the previous video, so if you want the full breakdown of that, I recommend watching that first, but the Herta's damage actually mostly comes from her talent. However, she can only use her talent when she has her enhanced skill, which is why for Trey's priority, I recommend talent into skill and then her ultimate. She will barely use her basic attack, so it's less important to level. Her trade stats and bonus abilities are all extremely important, but you usually want to unlock all of them anyways. For relic sets, it's very straightforward. The Herta only gets her enhanced skill after an ultimate, and the extra damage from her talent is also counted as skill damage. Hence, Lost Scholar in Erudition 4Ps is her best in slot. I mean, honestly, it's kinda obvious with the name and all. For planar ornaments, it's still pretty easy. You either go for Izumo or Rooted in Arena. Izumo gives huge buffs if one more party member on your team follows the same path as you, and due to her bonus ability and talent, you want to be running a second erudition anyways. Rooted gives some crit and skill damage, but overall, Izumo will still give you a bigger damage boost. However, the damage boost is so small that genuinely isn't much of a difference. I found Izumo to be only about 1 to 2% better, so just focus on the set with better substats. For main stats, it's always going to be crit, rate or damage depending on what you have, followed by attack or speed boots, and then attack or damage up, and finally attack rope. This part is slightly more complicated. For boots, attack or speed depends on your team. Some teams are able to give the Herta so much energy that she doesn't really need to be faster to regenerate energy for herself. In some scenarios, the Herta wants to one-shot the wave ASAP as well, and that's kind of what attack boots are for. Speed boots are more so if your team kinda lacks the frequency or AoE damage to battery the Herta, or maybe if you're running Sunday. However, I find running Sunday quite hard most of the time, because Robin and Remembrance MC are extremely strong for the Herta, and the Herta has to run another erudition, which means your options are quite limited, and hence most of the time, this should be attack boots since most of her teams are able to battery the Herta very efficiently. For Spear, it's attack or damage up. This slightly depends on your choice of boots. If you are already running attack boots, damage up will give you 1 to 2% more damage. But if you have speed boots, attack up I found to be barely better by 0.43%. Hence, if you don't really care, it really doesn't matter what your choice is, but if you want to maximize your damage, then there you go, I guess. For the Herta's rope, ERR might have actually been a pretty good choice if a bonus ability worked with ERR. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to do that, which is why attack percentage rope is always going to be the choice for her. Substats are always based on your main stats. If you're running a slow Herta, speed substats just don't really matter, especially if you have action advance in your team, like Robin Sunday or RMC. Hence, you should usually focus on crit rate, damage, and attack percentage. Crit rate is genuinely quite important for the Herta because the last hit is such a huge nuke, and if you miss the crit, you lose quite a lot of damage. This is why I recommend you to try to get at least 75% crit, the higher the better of course, but you should account for other buffs accordingly if you have Sunday as he gives crit buffs. Light cones are thankfully way easier to choose for the Herta. Her S1 is obviously the best, but we do have some very strong free-to-play or low spender alternatives, like Today is Another Peaceful Day, Genius's Repose, and even Eternal Calculus. However, you do need quite high superimposition for these light cones to be competitive with her S1. Like as you can see, S5 Peaceful Day is 87% of S1, but S1 Peaceful Day is only 80% of her signature light cone. The difference still isn't that big, but a peaceful S5 is probably more than enough for you to justify saving your pulls instead of pulling on S1. And so from best to worst, the options are S1 into the Unreachable Veil. This gives Herta 60% extra damage on ultimate and skill, which is basically her entire damage profile. Some crit rate, and 1 skill point after her ultimate. The value of this light cone more so lies in the crit rate and SP regen, since the Herta is very SP unfriendly and quite crit dependent. This will also allow you to play slightly more SP unfriendly teams, and hence gives you more freedom in team building. Peaceful Day S5 gives you an unconditional damage boost for every energy up to 160, and because the Herta has a very high energy cap at 220, she is able to get the entire damage boost, which is 64% at S5 and 32% at S1. This is why the light cone is very competitive in terms of damage with her S1. Genius's Repose is a very strong light cone for the Herta as it gives an unconditional attack percentage boost and a conditional crit damage boost. The Herta, being Erudition, has a very high chance of defeating at least a single enemy, and since the buff lasts for 3 turns, which means the uptime is going to be pretty high, especially in Pure Fiction. Eternal Calculus is kind of good for the same reason. It gives a lot of extra attack percentage and also sometimes speed. Even if you are running attack or speed boots, this extra speed is always going to be fairly useful. The day the Cosmos fell is quite literally a worse version of Genius's Repose, so I only really recommend using this if your other light cone has less superimposition or if you don't have it. The Seriousness of Breakfast is her worst light cone. It has a permanently stacking boost, but the buffs it provides are the lowest among the light cones, and that is why it's the lowest ranked option. For the Herta's Eidolons, she does have pretty high value Eidolons, and I find that they are somewhat similar to Rappa in the sense that they not only boost her damage, but they give her specific buffs that help her to be more comfortably played in low target scenarios like in Memory of Chaos or sometimes even Apocalyptic Shadow. E1 increases the talent damage multiplier and also resets interpretation to 15 instead of 0. This is much stronger in Memory of Chaos and in addition to E2 because in MOC, sometimes the weak enemies die too quickly and there are no extra interpretation stacks to rearrange. This helps you stack up to 42 faster. In Pure Fiction, this doesn't really matter as much, which is why it's only about 22% increase for me, as my simulation is in Pure Fiction, which I believe to be the Herta's best scenario. E2 is kinda bonkers and it pretty much gives the Herta permanent enhanced skills, and this is probably why the Herta can hold up to 4 stacks of inspiration. At the start of the battle or after using her ultimate, the Herta gets 2 stacks of inspiration instead of 1, and after using her enhanced skill, she advances her action by 35%, which means she will get 35% advance forever. It's a really disgusting Eidolon and almost doubles her damage in Pure Fiction, and I'm pretty sure will in fact double her damage in Memory of Chaos. This Eidolon is quite reminiscent of E2 Firefly and E2 Acheron in terms of strength. E4 just increases the speed of erudition units on your team by 12%, it's a nice buff, but it doesn't really impact the damage that much. E6 increases the Herta's Eyes, Rest, Pen, and increases her damage multiplier for ultimate based on the number of enemies present. Again, this is more so geared towards MOC with lower target scenarios because the damage multiplier increases when there are less enemies present, so this helps you to clear the stronger mobs when you have already dealt with the weaker enemies. Again, my simulation is in Pure Fiction, but even then it still gives a really big damage boost for the Herta, almost increasing her damage to 3 times of her base at E0. Personally, I think E1 is very good if you want to use the Herta in as many scenarios as possible, like Memory of Chaos, Apocalyptic Shadow, and if you want the Herta to become an absolute monster, you get her E2. Obviously, since she has pretty good light cone alternatives, her E1 will have higher value than her S1, especially in low target scenarios. Now for the Herta teams, it can be slightly complicated, so I want you to think from the perspective of which erudition unit you are going to be using. Let's start with Jade. It seems people think that the Herta is unplayable without Jade, but this is not really true. Jade is strong in the Herta team, don't get me wrong, but she does not want to give the Debt Collector to the Herta, unless you are playing like a hyperspeed Herta team or something. Most of the time, Jade wants to put her Debt Collector on Lingsha or even small Herta if you are running Sustainers, though I find the latter to be quite tough since Jade can drain your HP. Hence, the best combination I found is Jade plus Lingsha acting as batteries for the Herta because Lingsha has relatively high frequency and it's all AoE attacks. Lingsha is pretty much a pseudo erudition unit anyways, and she can give Jade enough frequency and targets to hit to follow up fast enough, which will then give even more energy to the Herta. In this kind of teams, Robin is extremely strong as she can give buffs to not only the Herta but also Jade and even gives Lingsha extra damage. I do not recommend running Jade with just the Herta unless you have Eidolons. This team is extremely strong in Pure Fiction because they just go on and on and on and on. Next, we have Small Herta and Himiko. These are only really good in Pure Fiction as well due to their automatic follow-ups and lack of single target damage against actual bosses in Apocalyptic Shadow or Memory of Chaos. Again, in such teams, Robin is extremely strong as the support because you can give a damage buff to Herta or Himiko. whereas your choice of sustain is more flexible. You can run a Venturine, Ningxia, or even Huo completely fine. Next, we have Serval and Argenti. Out of the two, I think Serval is much better due to her ultimate spam tech with her E2 and Eagle. She obviously does much less damage than Argenti, but she gives so much more damage to the Herta due to her spamming her out and regenerating energy for her. In such teams, I think Robin matters less as Serval doesn't really do damage, hence Remembrance MC or even Sunday become very strong, although Sunday ideally wants to be played with Robin. Hence, I would recommend Remembrance MC instead as a support for most players. I think most players don't quite know what Remembrance MC does yet, so I'll talk a little bit about what they do. They are extremely strong for the Herta as a free-to-play option as they can give true damage and action advance. True damage is a new mechanic, but it isn't really anything special. What it does is that it takes your final damage after going through all the calculations in the game, whatever, with your damage boost, your vulnerability, your res pen, and then it multiplies that. Remembrance MC also gives further true damage bonus based on the character's maximum energy, and the Herta has very high energy at 220, and so she is able to get 48% extra true damage, which really just means the Herta increases her overall damage by 50%, which is quite massive. On top of this, Remembrance MC gains charges based on your team's energy regeneration, and due to the Herta's bonus ability, the Herta and Remembrance MC have very good synergy for each other when considering everything she provides. Unfortunately, they will probably still fall behind in Jade, Ningxia, Robin teams because of full team action advance and buffs for your other secondary damage dealers is huge, but it is still a very strong option regardless, especially in teams where the Herta is mainly played as a hyper carry, which again is like Serval or Argenti teams. That's pretty much it for my big Herta guide. If you need her materials, here you go. Happy pulling and see you next time.
全知の存在よここに問う神聖とは何か